Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTV World. Nelson Mandela once said that education is the most powerful tool which can be used to change the world. These words then very deeply resonate with the realities of Pakistan's educational landscape too, more particularly because of course they also in ways more than one explain the very simple fact which is that Pakistan's education system can be very transformative. It has gone some extremely important, rather dynamic changes over the period of time. But what more is it that we do need to do so as to make education generally more inclusive and definitely more accessible in the Pakistani society? This is something upon which we'll be shedding light today. We'll be talking about the latest educational trends, the changes, the reform that we do see happening in this regard. In this regard, we'll also be talking about the need for us to then focus not only in, of course, improving access of the girl child to the education system, but also of differently able persons and, of course, trans children by that yardstick too. In this regard, we'll also be focusing on the role of technology, on the role of AI, and how that in turn has actually revamped Pakistan's education system, so to speak. We'll also be talking about not one, rather various very commendable initiatives taken by the Pakistani government so as to generally make the education system more accessible, more particularly for the female students. And last but not the least, we'll also be talking about this more so from a socio-economic perspective, talking about the barriers and the issues which then in this particular context become extremely relevant then. All of this today, that too with an extremely diverse panel. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for today's show is Hassan Jamil Saab. He is an education and inclusivity expert and he's also a policy expert. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Walaikum salam.
Thank you for joining us, sir.
Pleasure, Fat.
Alongside him, I have Ms. Sadaf Rahman. She's an education and skills training expert. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. My third panelist for today's show is Ms. Anika Rahman. She's a clinical psychologist and also a school counselor. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Walaikum salam, Fatma. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And via telephone line, we'll be joined by Ms. Gulaim Mariam Bhattu, who is an educationist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show. Now, before we start the discussion on today's topic, let's have a look at this brief report.
Education is the cornerstone of a thriving society, empowering individuals and fostering economic growth. In Pakistan, strides are being made to enhance educational accessibility for everyone, ensuring that no one is left behind. For girls, the government has introduced several impactful programs. The Wasila-e-Taleem initiative under the Benazir Income Support Program offers financial incentives to families, encouraging the enrollment of girls in primary schools. Additionally, the Girls Stipend Program is making education more attainable for young women across rural and undeserved areas. Inclusivity extends beyond gender. Efforts are underway to create supportive educational environments for transgender individuals and differently abled students. Specialized programs and resources are being developed to meet their unique needs, ensuring they receive the education they deserve. The government is also committed to empowering female educators with initiatives like quotas for female teachers and professional development programs. More women are joining the teaching profession, bringing diverse perspectives and fostering inclusive learning environments. Safe transportation schemes further support female teachers, ensuring their safety and encouraging their participation. These positive steps reflect Pakistanis' dedication to building an education and inclusive society where every individual, regardless of gender and ability, can achieve their fullest potential. Together, we are shaping a brighter future through education.
Welcome back. We just saw this report. Now to get the conversation started with you, sir. Sir, there is a very famous quotation which goes like that: one child, one teacher, one book and one pen can change the world. However, we do understand the fact this is easier said than done. So when we do talk about this more so from the Pakistan's educational landscape viewpoint, how easy or how difficult is it for anybody in Pakistan, be it a boy child, be it a girl child, be it somebody who's differently able to access the Pakistani education system?
It is indeed very difficult at this stage, and that is the reason, like must know, like the Prime Minister of the country has just launched the educational emergency.
That's right.
We have been facing 26 million out of school children, so like that's a huge number. So 26 million children does not have the access to the education. That includes girls, boys from the marginalized communities, also like the disabled children as well. As per my experience, so I will basically divide it into two halves.
Right.
So this 26 million out of school children, from where this number is coming from. So there is a number, like we have children of 4 to 5 years of age range which have to go to the school, for example, in this year. So that is another number. So the population rise is a huge contributing factor into this.
Right.
The population of Pakistan is increasing annually by the 2%, like 1.96% reported by UNFPA, so it's almost 2%. So you are basically giving almost every year the millions of children at the voice, like who has to basically enter into the education landscape of the country. The second thing is, the second half is already enrolled children or the children from the age range of 6 to 7 years till 16 years, to which the state has promised, like the state will be giving them free and compulsory education.
Right, as per Article 25A of the Pakistani Constitution.
Yes. So retaining them in the schools or like those children getting dropped out from the school is another challenge. Like this is the thing which I think so Pakistan now should consider it, or it should be a priority. And now we have seen that the government has been taking and has invited all of the international development agencies
to work on it, right?
Yes.
Sir, but when we do talk about the nature of the challenges, we do understand that yes, some of the challenges, they would be common to both these categories of children. But then again, when it comes to the girl child, the nature of the challenges may change then. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Gule Mariam, and I would want you to add to this further. So when we do talk about overall the changing trends that we then do see in terms of female education, in terms of female empowerment in the Pakistani society, what are the most notable trends that you do observe in your vast experience of being an educationist? Because we do see now generally there to be perhaps more greater acceptance of the girl child going to school, as was the case maybe a decade ago. So how do you see the situation, and what would your comments be on this?
The access to knowledge and attainment of quality education is the right of every human being. I believe that if you educate a man, you educate an individual, but if you educate a woman, you educate a nation. Women are the backbones of families and communities. They are the harbingers of change. I have seen a shift in the paradigm of rural areas and urban areas, but I will speak of rural areas more because I've been working in that sector for the past 2 decades. Even the literacy rates, as we've seen, they've risen from 21% to 49% for girls' literacy in Pakistan. In rural areas, I find that there's a change in the minds of people as they see that the benefits of education there has been an increase in their economic power from an individual point to a community level. When girls are educated, they educate the children and the whole household sort of changes. Then if they are, after attaining education, they get jobs, and if the jobs are good and they bring in money for the families see that there is a change in the entire household. Then we have seen that there are role models in Pakistan, female role models, starting from, if I begin from when Pakistan was made, Fatma Jinnah was the first woman opposition leader. And then coming down to our first Prime Minister, who was Benazir Bhutto, and now we have a first Chief Minister, Maryam Nawaz Sharif. So we have, role models in front of us, and the girls in the rural communities and the families are watching that how just attaining education, being educated, going up the ladder, how it makes a difference in their own lifestyles, in their households, then the community level, and then at national and international levels. So there has been a change in the minds of people. It is because of a lot of awareness also, that because of the social media, even in rural areas there's access to internet, and people watch that girls and boys are of equal, in every way they are equal in economic and political stature and in their intellect, and so they are finding that girls' education is important because it is going to enhance their lifestyles, and later it's going to benefit the whole community.
But another question that I would want to put to you in this regard is the fact that we do see now that the government has put forward initiatives, more than one, the purpose of which is then to, of course, improve the female students' access to the education system. In this regard, it's then very important to also mention the fact that the Honorable Chief Minister Punjab, Maryam Nawaz Sahiba, has announced free bus service for students, and then we do have the Pink Scooty scheme in place as well. Alongside that, we also appreciate the fact that the Ministry of Federal Education and Professional Training has been providing free bus service for female students and even teachers, so to speak. Whereas, of course, we do appreciate the fact that yes, these initiatives, they are well intentioned, they are actually there so as to improve the female students' access to the education system. What more, in your opinion, do you feel needs to be done so as to overall improve not only the female students' access to the education system, but also generally to make it more inclusive too?
There are some persistent challenges or barrier in female literacy in rural areas of Pakistan. The first and foremost being poverty. Poverty changes priorities. If a household does not have enough money for the day to feed their children at home, they will not send their child to school. So, number one, that can be done and I think should be the way forward is give monetary incentives or fee packages that are in the rural areas especially that encourage female literacy more. Then the infrastructure and resources. In rural areas especially, there's a dearth of schools and good teachers. There's absenteeism in teaching facilities. There are no resources, especially in this digital era. We don't have computing or IT facilities in rural areas. Then this is a patriarchal society. There are socio-cultural norms. Most of the girls, 18% to be precise, are married before their 18th birthday. And they are not given priority over the male child to attain knowledge and to get employment. In my opinion, we have a lot of female role models now who are working in politics, in different offices, in police, in different aspects of as engineers, as pilots. So we have these role models for the young girls now and for families now. So what we can do is give awareness in the rural areas, be it a door-to-door campaign to increase literacy and ensure that if a girl does attain education and goes to the top level, she is given that level of employment which makes rest of the community proud and encourage rest of the girls that how female literacy is important in our society and in this time and age.
On which I'll come to you, madam, and I would want you to add to this further. So when we do talk about this from a socio-economic lens, what do you feel are the biggest barriers in this regard, and how do you feel can we then work towards more cost-effective, more workable solutions this way? Because we can't ignore the fact that Pakistan, at the end of the day, is a developing country with limited resources.
The biggest problem I feel is the words that we use to describe what the problem is.
Right.
Just like you have with a doctor, 50% is the diagnosis and understanding what the problem is, that's half the solution. So similarly, when we use terms like emergency or crisis, it implies that it's very sudden and it's very urgent. And then you have very sudden and urgent solutions, which is not the nature of education. You don't know whether your STEM female graduate is doing well in the workforce. It's because she had a good math teacher when she was 6 years old or 7 years old or not. Like there's a very different lens with which you need to review education, which surpasses the election cycle. And so our policies that are perhaps a little urgent need to take a longer term view.
Right.
The second thing is when you're looking at what is the most effective thing that you can do, because you have limited resources, what is it that you're doing well and what's the most effective thing that you need to do? Again, the problem, I've worked in this sector for over 20 years now. I've seen many emergencies. 15 years ago, the emergency was that kids are not getting enrolled in school. With a lot of donor and government money, our net enrollment rate has become better. And so what we've realized is that it was not a demand issue, especially at the primary years. It's not like parents did not want to send their kids to school. Even the poorest of parents understand that putting their child in school is going to improve their chances in life.
Right.
The problem was supply.
Right.
There were not enough good quality schools or schools present at all.
Schools, lack of teachers, and then
Absolutely.
of course proper
It's a supply issue.
infrastructure, even for that
school
matter,
thing.
not having proper roads by that yardstick too.
Exactly.
I would want you to add to this. I think she's raised some very valid points here. When we do talk about all these issues, we do need to have some more futuristic and a long-term view to the same. So when we do talk about this from your particular viewpoint, because I do understand that you are a clinical psychologist at a school, how important is teacher training particularly, that too, so as to ensure that yes, we do work towards a more inclusive and a more accessible educational system?
I'll talk from the point of differently able children, because if teachers are not trained in a way that they can include students of different challenges or abilities, then there's no point of inclusive education, right? So teacher training, actually the teachers are the main drivers that makes the inclusive education go forward. So if there's no teacher training, then there cannot be any inclusive education. So there's a need of time that we train teachers in specialization, and we have these trainings in a continuous way where they know that different students, even if they are in the mainstream students, even if they don't have any challenges, they have different learning styles.
Right. Looking at it from another perspective, perhaps their biggest challenge would be to be able to better integrate with differently able persons. So the narrative completely changes. But when we do talk about this more so from the viewpoint that yes, it is of course beneficial, a very debatable point which is raised world over is the fact when we talk about forming the educational system, why is it so important then to ensure that yes, differently able persons, they get a chance to study in the same classrooms which able-bodied persons do, because we do see the different countries, they have very varying approach on this very issue. So how would you comment on that? Do you feel that yes, this is that thing, this is that solution that we need to work towards, or do you feel then again, depending on perhaps the level and of course the seriousness of the disability, we can have separate classrooms that way?
It depends. There are certain levels of differently able children as well. Suppose if a student comes with a physical difficulty, if they have hearing impairment or visual impairment in a mild manner, they can sit in the classroom, all right, with little to very little access arrangements. We can make the classroom inclusive for that child, all right. If obviously if there's a student who has a severe disability, then obviously we can look into different options, because then the teachers are, of course, they are not specialized in this field, right?
True.
So by just making, suppose I'll give you an example. There's a student who everybody thought had an issue of attention and focus, right? And when we looked into the factors, it was just that they could not hear properly the teacher because they were sitting at the back, and by just changing the seating arrangement of that student,
you solved the problem.
Yes, the problem was solved.
So then again, it goes back to what she was also saying, teacher training is something that we really need to focus upon. So coming towards you, when we talk about this more so from the poverty's lens, now we do understand the fact that then again we do see, you know, the government focusing on providing financial support to those in need of it, and then of course we've also seen there being focus being placed on having skill development initiatives in which students will get IT courses training, and then of course Google certification and PSDF courses too. Whereas of course we do appreciate the fact all these initiatives, they are well intentioned so as to then mitigate the impact of poverty on students. Do you not feel here that perhaps we need to have policy reform at a very core level, and policy reform which is then very targeted towards this very issue?
Adding to what Sadaf and Mariam like previously commented on to that, so like policy works with the demand and supply side, like which Sadaf has rightly pointed out. So for the very first time, as per my knowledge, the Prime Minister of the country has allocated funds for the out-of-school children, like 25 billion rupees. So like this happens for the very first time. So it shows like now the policy makers are at the policy level, people are really serious about this issue. What you have just asked, like about that, including that non-formal kind of the setups or the technical education, this is very important. So basically you have to inculcate that skill set into the children or into the students or into the learners, like what they want to do after graduating after 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever their program would be. But with this, like definitely
so
government
not only what they are doing but also what they are required to do, because you see the market is changing at a very fast pace, so they need to be very relevant, they need to have those relevant skills in this regard too.
Exactly. So this was my point, like you have to basically make a long-term sustainable plan but with the short-term targets. So the problem with the policy making in Pakistan was in the previous years was like we do not have followed any education emergency plans previously in our history. So just let's make a long-term sustainable plan with the short-term targets. By this, like if you can cater that demand and supply kind of an issue, like in the both ways in this policy making for advancing that technical education for the students, even at the provincial level or at the federal level. So also you have to come up with that supply side as well.
Right.
Like whether the job market resonates with the graduates
Of course,
you are
it has to be an
producing or
accurate
not.
reflection of
Exactly.
the same. Madam, I would want you to add to this because I do understand that this is your area of expertise and of course you worked in this sector too. So when we do talk about this from the viewpoint of then ensuring that yes, we do give children those skills which would then make them more employable per se. Do you feel that this is an area that we have been focusing upon, or do you feel that yes, there is still more leverage for us to work more in this particular area?
Not just in Pakistan, but I think this is a problem the world is facing around 21st century skills, where you have a job market that is evolving so fast that schools cannot predict what jobs will be required or what skills will be required.
Right.
And so what happens is that you're not sure. So for example, when I was in college, social media didn't exist. It was invented after we graduated, and it's an entire industry and sector now. Even though I'm a computer science major, there's an entire sector that if I had not stayed relevant with, I would not have known about.
Right.
So what's happening, what we do know is fundamentally, globally, there has been a shift in what the objective of education is. So initially, our schools right now have been designed in the 19th century for industrial revolution jobs.
Right.
And
expecting students to graduate with
in the
21st
century
skills.
yes,
right.
and our teachers are from the 20th century. And so the problem that we're facing is that the purpose of education is no longer rote learning to become a good factory employee. It is to be able to think
critically,
because everything else can be done through automation or through this advent of tech and in our digital future.
Right.
And what we're struggling with is, again, coming up with programs that help students learn how to think. There are certain interventions, like we know through research that STEM, especially in the early years, inculcates 21st century skills.
But in cases like these, then perhaps we need to draw inspiration from countries like Singapore as well, who have very categorically initiated programs, the purpose of which is to actually teach children skills so as to make them more marketable, more employable by that yardstick too. But moving on, when we do talk about this more so from the viewpoint of female inclusion, that too in the STEM fields, how do you see this changing over a period of times? Because typically we did see this time where women then opting to study STEM subjects or opting for any of these careers related to the STEM fields was perhaps in some ways considered to be taboo, or it was something which was not encouraged. However, over a period of time, we have seen the trends changing. So how would you comment on that?
Absolutely. You can't talk about tech and STEM and not talk about gender inclusion because it's such an issue endemic to one particular sector. I do think it reflects overall the culture in general, which, as you pointed out, is changing. The stats are changing. There are more women in the workforce. There are more women in more traditionally male-dominated fields. There are women that are performing much better at the student level in schools and colleges in STEM programs.
Right.
I think what's needed is perhaps a culture and mindset shift, which is a little different and harder to bring about. But one thing I really want to point out in terms of STEM is that you need to make sure that there is a path for women to be able to get into the workforce, things that enable them, things like transportation, which is where the bus system is really good, is a good initiative, or the scooty system is a good initiative. Once they're in that environment, they are protected not just by workforce policies and labor laws, but also through the social norms that are being enforced. So there's a lot of ecosystem shift that needs to happen, which is not that
and this
easy
needs
to do.
to happen, in ways more than one. It has to coexist, basically.
And there's a business case for that, absolutely. Smart businesses, there's a correlation. You're more profitable the more women you have in your workforce. So the research is out there.
Coming towards you, I would want you to add to this. When we do talk about the benefits of inclusive education, more so with regards to differently able persons, more so with regards to the trans community in the country, how do you feel is it beneficial? Because you see, then again, this perhaps is a more of a new concept, and many people wouldn't at a very basic level even understand the importance of the same. How do you see the cognitive development of children changing, that too for the better, especially when they do have inclusive education?
I'll start with my field, that is the psychological benefits the inclusive education has on differently abled or the trans children, right? So when you see, when they are sitting in a mainstream school, they are automatically they're being included, which automatically has an effect on their personality. It increases their self-confidence, self-esteem. It gives them a positive body image, right? It also increases their social skills. They know how to speak in a real world, because in the end of the day, just as you were mentioning, these students are going to compete with the same students in the job market, right? So if they have those social skills, if we start working on those social skills early on, they can have a very good social skill set when they are ready to go into the real world, right? I'll start with the psychological benefits of this, all right? So when you have an inclusive education program, it means that you are welcoming those children into the real world setting, right? So it creates a sense of belonging between these children, and it also affects their personality, like they will develop self-esteem and self-confidence when they are sitting with the main or regular stream children, right? Okay, coming from the perspective of regular children who are sitting with those differently able children, what happens is it creates a community of tolerance and acceptance. It also gives them a diverse perspective to see their point of view and how they are just like them. Just because they have a certain challenge, that does not mean that they have to be excluded. Just like you were mentioning that we have to make them ready for the 21st century, right? So we were talking about 21st century skills. 21st century skills are not only the technical skills, they are also the soft skills that we talk about, the conflict resolution, the problem solving skills, the social skills.
And here I feel another aspect on which we must touch upon then, of course, since you have talked about crisis situations too, you know, a lot of times we see that countries who have perhaps gone through various disasters, natural calamities, or even for that matter, a few years ago we did see the entire world go through the COVID-19 pandemic. So situations like these, they very particularly also call for the need for us to have more inclusive and of course accessible education. So when it comes to catering to such situations, how do you then as a psychologist propose can we work around also tackling the trauma that students perhaps might be undergoing?
I'll start with, again, that it comes back to teacher training as well, because a lot of times you see there are differently able children, like physically able children, you can see them, that's very visible. But what about the psychosocial or behavioral problems, right? And the trauma affects that. Children might have some emotional problems. So if the teachers are trained in a way that they can detect the early signs of those, so they can, you know, they can refer that child to a specialist, and we can have early intervention in place. So it's very important that teachers are trained just not in a specialized way, but in a way that they can detect early signs. Because mostly what happens is a student, suppose he is going through a depressive phase, he has trauma in his life, but mostly the teachers label them as lazy. So it goes back
to ensuring that yes, the teachers, they are well trained, they are cognizant, and they themselves also have that exposure to inclusive training at the end of the day, because they won't be able to impart those values if they don't have that exposure. Right, madam, your point is noted. Coming towards you, Ms. Gule Mariam, since we are talking about generally the level of inclusivity, the level of accessibility in the education system, how do you see over a period of time the curriculum changing? How do you see perhaps there being more of a focus being placed on STEM subjects, more female participation in these subjects, to life-based skill training to be a very important part of the education system too? So what are the most notable changes you feel that have emerged with regards to making overall the education system more inclusive and more accessible, and what do you feel are the issues that we still need to work upon?
Pakistan's education policies have evolved in the past decades to address gender disparities and access to education, focusing on girls' education and aimed at creating more equitable and inclusive education system in the country. As board member of National Curriculum Council, new policies were devised and the whole curriculum for the country was revamped in view of the fact that there has been changes in the world and we have to go with the same pace. Pakistan has to go at the same pace of the West and other countries in giving quality education to our students, especially the girls. A pilot project called Trans Education has been launched in Multan in 2021, whereby transgenders are being given formal education in public schools. This is the first in the history of Pakistan that it has been recognized that there is a transgender community and they have an equal right to education with other members of the society. So this is one step that has been taken in a positive manner. Then we have also realized that there are students who are visually and hearing impaired, and there are students with learning disabilities who are very intelligent, who should not be left behind. So a separate curriculum has been devised in policy at the National Curriculum Council for these students who are specially abled, and if they have special abilities, we should have a separate curriculum for them, and then have teacher trainings for these students, and they should have the right to quality education as rest of the country. And along with that, in the curriculum there has been a lot of stress on peace, tolerance among every religion in our country, especially the minorities. Prior to this new policy, every student had to study the same religion of Islamic studies in a certain class of religion. But now there has been a curriculum where it's called ethics, and so many different religious studies have been added to it, while some students, the Muslim students, are studying their own religion. Minorities can have their own separate books and their own curriculum in that time. So this has been a positive change in the educational policy and the framework of the country, hoping to form a very peaceful, tolerant and educated future society.
On which, sir, I'll come to you, and moving towards the end of the show. So I would want you to comment to what Ms. Gul Mariam said. But then again, of course, in our local Pakistani context, when we do talk about all these issues, we need to understand that yes, we have to have a workable model which then works for us in our local context too. So when it comes to perhaps implementing the Prime Minister's educational emergency program, or for that matter generally aspiring as a country to overall improve both the quality as well as the accessibility of education in the country, what are the issues you feel that we need to work upon, and perhaps some countries that we can possibly take inspiration from too?
So we have to be, first of all, very much clear about the outcome what we want to achieve. Like what kind of learner, after getting graduated from a school, college or a university, what kind of a person we want out of that after 10, 12 years or 14, 16 years of education. So like that outcome should be very, very clear.
Right.
For example, like if I talk about some of the international models happening across the world. So the world is now moving from content-based curriculum to the competency-based curriculum. So this idea of competency-based curriculum was introduced by Finland. Everyone knows about the Finland education's model, like one of the top across the world. And then Canada is also doing that. But the developing nations are taking inspiration from that. Kenya, Philippines are developing countries having a similar context to Pakistan.
Canada particularly has been very focused upon having a very inclusive curriculum.
So like what I have seen that of this competency based curriculum in Kenya, like that has changed children, that has made children more equitable, respect to the diversity, very, very gender sensitive, gender responsive. What that competency based curriculum has done there is basically it has given the opportunity to the students to go through the theory and then practice it through the practicals as well.
Right.
For example, like I was interviewing a boy, a boy of a grade 4, and Fatma, I think so you can relate it as well. So I was asking him about his future aspirations. So he wants to become a lawyer. So he said that all of the books, all of the material, all of the learning material is very, very much important. But I have to work on my communication skills.
Of course,
because
that is
when
so important.
you want to become a lawyer, so listening to that from a from a student in a 4th grade, so that was like quite an eye-opening kind of a thing for me. Like he is basically,
he's very aware.
Yes, he is very aware, like what the skill set he must have to reach to that point.
Right.
So
but then again, you see, this goes back to the basics, and most of the issues which all of you, then highlighted is the fact that, it has to do a lot with how enabling the system is, what kind of policies do we have in place, and then of course, perhaps at some level, laws too for that matter, because if we talk about the implementation of Article 25A of the Pakistani Constitution, this again is a provincial subject. We need laws in different provinces, which we already do have, so as to implement it. Madam, coming towards you, when we do talk talk about this more so from the viewpoint of having public-private partnerships. We do understand that yes, when it comes to the education sector, we do see such partnerships happening, in fact for the longest time now. But when we were to sit back, if we are to sit back and then analyze how effective have these partnerships been to ensure any person's right to education, where do you feel have we done well with these partnerships, and what more do you feel needs to be done so as to then also, of course, in some ways more than one, overcome the limitations of the same?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what happens is that when we're looking at education in Pakistan, it's so easy to focus on all the terrible negative numbers that are coming out, whether it's the out of school population, whether it's the fact that kids that are in school who still can't read or write. But there's some things that we have done well as a country, and they must be spoken about.
Definitely.
The first one is, like you said, there's a public-private partnership model that was pioneered in the late 90s, early 2000s, first by the government of Punjab, and through, it was called PEF, the Punjab Education Foundation, and now it has spread to many different provinces as well. And the idea was that the government acknowledges that they are not good implementers perhaps in government schools because of whatever reasons there are, but you have a thriving private sector that is achieving good learning outcomes, and so why don't you put that money into the private sector's hands, and what you can do is then inculcate free education in those schools, make sure that you're testing the learning outcomes and then providing funding for that student that passes whatever learning minimum standards there are of quality of education. And that has been a global standard, I think, that we have set as Pakistan. There are some limitations in terms of the amount of money that is stipulated, maybe in terms of the ecosystem, maybe in terms of are these actually passing the tests, are they ghost students, are they actual students? So there are certain limitations, but by and large Pakistan has pioneered this, and I think we need to be kinder to ourselves.
We need to keep moving in that direction. It has to be a long-term sustainable effort.
The entire world has changed since the last time the computer science curriculum had been written, and all these efforts have now come to a set of standards that has been built that is comparative to the rest of the world. So whether you pick up a developing country computer science curriculum or whether you pick up our standards, they are at par. The problem now comes in implementation. So can our teachers teach this? Can our schools have the equipment,
right infrastructure? Do we even have roads
this?
to get to all the schools and education systems, especially when we do talk about the remote and the rural areas? So yes, of course, we do understand that if we are working towards overall improving or reforming the education system, then this needs to be done in a very holistic manner. Coming towards you, Anika, and my last question to you is that when we do talk about overall mobilizing the community or ensuring that yes, we do take the Pakistani community, Pakistani society along with us, how important is it for us to do so if we want to ensure the success of education programs?
It is perhaps the first and foremost step, like somebody was mentioning, that there are a lot of parents in rural areas that, who do not know about that the education is free, so they don't send their children to schools, right? So if we have certain outreach programs designed, or we have certain campaigns that raises awareness about why it is important, why education or inclusive education is important, why it is important to send the girls to school, then it makes all the difference. If I talk about differently abled children, I've seen it a lot of times that parents feel, if suppose I'll give you an example, if a student with on an autism spectrum, if he's sitting in a mainstream school, he is stigmatized that regular children will also get it. I want to raise that awareness that it's not contagious. That's not how it's done, right?
But in this regard, do you not feel that when we do talk about, of course, exploring the potential of collaborative efforts here, perhaps Pakistani media can also collaborate with education institutions to ensure that people do get their right to education, because education, as we all understand, is then not confined to the four corners of a classroom. It does also encompass education that we do seek, knowledge that we do seek in everyday, life as it is.
I absolutely agree with you. Just like you have invited me to your show, that is a collaboration, right? This is a platform where I can raise awareness about how differently abled students can benefit from inclusive education. And just like Sadaf rightly said, social media is a big thing, and we need to use that. We need to use those kind of platforms to raise awareness. Every school has an Instagram presence, right? So they can post awareness campaigns over there. If schools have events, they can invite invite different media personals to their schools to see how the things are being worked in the school setting and how suppose I'll give you an example. We recently had Autism Awareness Month last April, and we invited different schools. We also invited special education needs schools during our fun fair, so that they get to see how it is in an inclusive environment. They get to experience that inclusive environment. So it's very important to create these kinds of opportunities for these kind of students. There's another example that I would like to give, like Special Olympics. They have unified schools, and they work with the mainstream schools, and they provide opportunities to have different kind of activities where they differently able children and the mainstream students, they come together to have some sports events, or maybe just a poetry event, something like that, so that they sit together, they work together, just like we were talking about the communication skills as Sir was saying. So it also increases their communication skills, their social skills, and it helps to make them ready for the real world. So it's very important to have those kinds of windows.
Right, and of course, it also by that virtue gives them fresh perspectives too, because when you are working with so many people, it's also very important to have a very rich perspective and a more informed perspective that way too. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Gule Mariam, and before we conclude today's show, my last question to you would be that when we do talk about, the ever-evolving role and of course importance of technology, of AI, how do you see it actually impacting Pakistan's educational landscape, and do you not feel that at a very basic level it has had that impact of not only perhaps improving inclusivity but also accessibility of children to the education system, and in ways more than one also enhance the educators' teaching skills too? So how would you look at this issue?
Technology is an enabler. Thanks to globalization, the world's economy has become more knowledge-based, bringing with it the best practices from each country's economy and the school practices and the pedagogical skills for enhanced learning outcomes. When the pandemic struck, the world came together and each country discussed how they were doing their best way to cope with continuing educational activities. At Education World Forum in London, where there's a conference held every year, educationists and head of states met, and they shared their knowledge, like how each country coped with post-COVID, how they had digitized their own educational system. So in a way, it opened doors. Digitization, it opens the door for sharing of knowledge and communication, and this has been for Pakistan as well, because the doors have been opened. Many new practices have come into place, like connecting classrooms has been one. Even in my rural schools, we connected our classroom to a classroom in the urban areas in the city, and internationally also people want to see what every country did in the time of crisis. And with the new Chief Minister Maryam Nawaz Sharif's vision of digitization in education and encouraging entrepreneurs, there are going to be new IT parks and tech cities coming into place, which brings us hope and positivity for Pakistan and the future of digitization in Pakistan.
Right, madam, your point is noted. On which note I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Hassan Saab. Thank you so much, Ms. Sadaf. Thank you so much, Ms. Anika. And thank you so much, Ms. Gule Mariam, for your time today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about Pakistan's changing educational landscape. In this regard, of course, we spoke about, not one, rather various initiatives that the Pakistani government has then brought so as to overall improve the accessibility of the education system, so to speak. If we are serious in doing away with this educational crisis, which then of course does exist in the country today, then we do need to at a very core level address problems which then of course encompass not only having the proper infrastructure in place, but also doing away with not one, rather various kinds of socio-economic disparities. If we as a society want to progress, then education is something that we seriously need to focus upon, because a society cannot be equitable until and unless it has an inclusive education system in place. Thank you for watching The Society. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.